Hi there, today is the 30th of May and I'm resuming my lecture on Chapter 3. Okay, we left off on page 50 and we were talking about how money is measured. And the book says at about 7, actually there are 6 common ones, there are 7 if you stretch it, but there are 6 ways of measuring a money supply. And I would like to hold you responsible for 2 of them, okay? These are things you should know. And they are called M something, okay? M0, M1, M2, M3, and I'm going to focus on M1 and M2. Now, if you watch financial news with people like Maria Bartiromo, Jim Cramer, Susie Orman, they sometimes refer to M1 and M2. Here's what they mean, okay? How much money is out there in the American financial system, okay? M1, you often hear about. M2 is the most common one, and I place more stock in that one, friends. But M1 means we take all of the value of our currency and our coins in our pockets and add it up, okay? We add traveler's checks as well, and we add demand checkable deposits. What does that mean? A demand deposit, as you may already know, means a checking account. When you put money in a bank and you have the right to draw checks against it, that is something that is available on demand. So when you hear demand deposit, think checking account, okay? So now, as of 2013, when I wrote the first edition of this book, the Fed Reserve said that currency and coin, look at the M1 column, was $1 trillion, okay? This is all enumerated in billions, okay? So that's $1.097 trillion. Travelers' checks were 3.8 billion, and checking accounts were 1.3 trillion. Add it all up, and M1 at this point in time was $2.5 trillion. Okay, now M2, which carries a lot more water, in my opinion, starts with M1. Everything that's in M1 is in M2. Okay, so we take all of the same factors, but now we add a few more things. We add savings accounts. Okay, now that's a big number. That's $6.7 trillion. Okay, not checking accounts, but savings accounts. We add in CDs less than 100,000. Anything over 100,000 is called a jumbo. Those aren't quite as liquid, so we only look at the ones under $100,000, and that is $621 billion as of this stat. And retail money funds. Okay, now a money fund is what? It's when you take your money and invest it in an account that invests in instruments of the money market as I defined it in my last lecture. Okay, now you and I can do that. That's called a retail money fund. Corporations and mega banks can do it. That's called a commercial money fund. Now we're excluding those. We're only looking at the ones that you and I as consumers, retail, invest in, okay? And as of this writing, that was about $651 billion. Okay, we add all those up, M1 plus those last 3 items, and we get 10.5 roughly trillion dollars. Okay, please know those items. Now, when I ask you to solve for any one of these factors, given the others, you should be able to do it. Okay? That's M1 and M2. When you get into M3 and M4, they start adding in all kinds of major, large investments, okay? These are the ones that seem to affect us the most closely to home. Okay? All right, I hope you find that helpful. Okay, and these are all, again, in billions of dollars. Okay, next. I spent a few minutes here explaining why we simply can't print money when a country is in financial crisis. Why don't they just stop printing more money? They can't do that. The easiest way to envision that is if I have a couple of New England Patriots tickets and I can't use them, and I say to you guys, offer me some money, I'll sell them to you. So Alex offers me $100 for them, and then Asia offers me 200, and then Nabil says, oh no, I'll give you more than that. Then Sean says, okay, I'll give you $500 for the pair. Okay, when you print more money, you have more dollars available to chase a limited number of goods. It doesn't work. You can't do that. Okay, that leads to inflation, just the way the price of my Patriots tickets went up. So The way that money is created is different. And one of my goals in this chapter is to show you how that happens. Okay? That is done by the Federal Reserve, and they do it in one of three ways. Okay? So please don't think we can just print more money. That does not work. Okay. The Federal Reserve has three tools at their disposal. And then, by the way, I'm around page 51 right about now. The first one is called the reserve requirement. Okay, because of some of the problems that our financial systems and our banking systems ran into back in the 20s and 30s of the 20th century, we had to make sure that wouldn't happen again. And one of the ways we did that was by setting a reserve requirement. Now, remember, in the last lecture I said that a bank is going to take every dollar it's got and try to loan it out. That's how they make their money. Okay, it's in a bank's best interest to make sure they loan out every dollar they possibly can. The Federal Reserve said, no, put on the brakes. You, Mr. or Ms. Banker, are going to have to put a certain amount of money away for all the money you have. You can take all the money you've got ready to lend, and you're going to have to lend it all, but you're going to have to take one little piece, the required reserve, and put it in your vault. You can't lend it, okay? The bank can keep it in their vault. They can put it in on deposit with the Federal Reserve or with another member bank, but they cannot loan it. That gives a little more stability to our banking system so we can have a run on the banks like we had back in the 30s. Okay? That's called a required reserve. Now, here's a formula. The Federal Reserve can exercise what we call monetary policy, their control over the money supply, in three ways, as I'll get to. The first one is the reserve requirement. Funds in the vault of a bank are out of play. They cannot lend them. Now, that formula can be changed by the Federal Reserve. As of when I wrote this, here's what it was on this page. This is page 52 in my book, but it's right here for you. So if a bank has $0 to $12.4 million, they don't have to keep anything in their vault. They can lend it all. Now, this may have changed, so I speak with caution here. Now, for anything over $12.4 million to $79.5 million, they must take 3% of that and put it in their vault. They can't lend it. Anything over $79.5 million, as you see, they must hold aside 10% of it. Again, if everyone starts trying to pull their money out of the system, and I'll show you why this is important after, that money will, a certain amount of it will be there to help the banking system maintain its stability. Okay, that's a bracketed system. So now, I give you an example. If a bank has $90 million in reserves, that means how much they have. Cash, call it whatever you want, reserves. That's what an asset is from a bank's point of view. So our fictional bank here has $90 million. All right, on the first 12.4 of that 90, they don't have to hold anything. Of the next amount, 12.4 to 79.5, that would be what? That would be 67.1 million. They must hold 3% of that aside. In this bank's case, that would be $2 million. And finally, anything over 79.5 million, up to where the bank is, in this case 90 million, they have to hold 10% of it. That's $1,050,000. So in total, our fictional bank here has to hold $3,063,000. They cannot loan that. That's going to be secured in their vault or on deposit with our central bank of the United States, the so-called Federal Reserve. Okay? The Federal Reserve is unofficially part of the government, okay? It is subject to government influence, but it operates as a separate entity, not as a branch of the U.S. government. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right, very well. All right, now please keep in mind, whenever a member bank of the Federal Reserve Network, our local bank, walk downtown, Dean Bank, Rockland Trust, whenever that bank has any money on deposit with the Federal Reserve, we have to hold these reserves, we'll put them in our vault, or we can put them at the Federal Reserve. they have to earn interest on that. Now it's going to be very, very low. Okay, as of this writing, it was 0.25%. Okay, that's known as 25 basis points in the banking parlance. Okay, they call hundredths of a percent basis points. Okay, so that would be 25 basis points, 0.25%. The Federal Reserve System has to pay that bank interest on how much it has on deposit, just like you would receive interest on money you have on deposit at your local bank. Okay? So that is the first of three tools of the Federal Reserve, the reserve requirement. It gives stability to the money system, and it can become a tool of monetary policy. That's what the Federal Reserve does. They exercise monetary policy. They control the money supply. Okay, number two, the discount rate. Okay, now banks in the Federal Reserve System, all of the banks we deal with, loan money to each other. They hold money on reserve from each other. And whenever you have, if you're a bank and you have money at a neighbor bank, they have to pay you interest. And if they have money on deposit with you, you must pay them interest. And that interest is calculated at what we call the so-called federal funds rate. Okay? The federal funds rate. That's the money at which banks loan to each other. Now, they would prefer to do that. If a bank needs a little bit of money to cover requirements or whatever, they will call a neighbor bank and say, please advance me enough money, I will pay you interest, I have to pay you interest at the federal funds rate. Okay, it's very low. As of this writing, it was 0.25%. Okay, now, suppose you can't find a bank that will do that. Well, you can go to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve will charge you a little more interest. That, friends, is called the discount rate. Okay? The discount rate, as you see up here, is the rate at which the Federal Reserve banking system will loan you money if a member bank can't, and they charge you a bit more. So your first line of defense is to go to another bank, and if you can't find one, you go to the Fed. The Fed will charge you a little bit more, okay? As of this writing, that was 0.5% higher, okay? So you could have gone to a fellow member bank and borrowed at 0.25, and if you can't find one and you have to go to the Fed, you have to pay them 0.75%. Now the Fed has the power to change that rate, and that's another tool of monetary policy. They can change that discount rate. Okay? Now here's the problem with the first two approaches, friends. The reserve requirement and the discount rate. When the Fed changes those, well, it's almost like trying to fix a china cup with a hammer, okay? It's very hard for the Fed to fine-tune monetary policy by those first two methods. Therefore, they don't mess with it very often, okay? They prefer to fine-tune. And the fine-tuning approach that they take is called the open market operation. That means that the Federal Reserve can expand or contract the money supply by putting more money into it. Now, once they put more money into it or take money out of it, okay? Remember supply and demand from my last lecture. Now, that money that they put in expands. It doesn't stay the same, rather. If they inject $10 million into the banking system, it grows and grows and grows and becomes something a lot larger than the 10 million you start with. In the remainder of this lecture and the start of next lecture, I will explain that. It is called the deposit expansion effect. Please remember, the Fed can inject money into the system. How would you like to do this? Would you like to write a check on yourself without any money in your checking account? That's essentially what the Fed does. Okay, so by purchasing governmental securities with a check written on themselves, they deposit that money into an account, and that account just takes off. That money's in the banking system now, and it grows. Every time it's loaned out, it grows. I will demonstrate that for you very shortly, okay? The government can do the opposite. They can pull money out of the system by selling their securities, okay? So remember, money is not created by printing more currency. Money is created by the injection of money through the Federal Reserve into open market operations. The formula by which they do it is actually reasonably simple. I'll explain that. It's called the deposit expansion effect. Okay? Now, let's go over here. I'm going to start this. I may not have time to finish it, but I will post this for you. This is called the deposit expansion effect to show you what happens when more new money, and I stress that, new money, enters the banking system. Okay, so we're going to start with this. These are named after former students. When I was giving this lecture, I chose the name of students, okay? You have a woman named Amanda, and she has $10,000 of brand new money. Let's say she finds it in a strong box from World War II under her grandfather's bed, whatever. $10,000 of new money enters the banking system. Amanda grabs it, runs down to her bank number 1, and deposits it. Okay, now let's remember our basic accounting. What does Bank 1 have now? Bank 1 now has an asset. They've got cash. Bank 1 calls it reserves, but it's cash. And they want to do something with that cash. Okay? But what happens with Amanda? They have a liability to Amanda. Friends, whenever you bring money to your bank and open an account, that bank has a liability to you. Okay? You are a liability to them because you can withdraw that money at any time. That's why we call it a demand deposit. So the bank is going to increase an asset, cash, for $10,000, and they increase a liability to Amanda for $10,000 since she can draw it any time. She's not going to for now. Okay? So now the bank has an asset and a liability of 10 grand each. Now, all right, that's brand new money. Now, I'm just going to give a flat percentage. Forget the bracketing I showed you in the previous example of the reserve requirement. Forget about the 0, the 3, the 10. I want to keep it very simple here. Okay? Let's assume that laws change and the bank has to hold 10% flat. Make the math easy. Okay. Bank 1 says, well, I've now got $1,000. I'm sorry, $10,000 of Amanda's money. The law says I've got to hold 1,000. So be it. I'd love to loan all 10,000, but I can't. So I'll put the $1,000, 10% of it, in my bank, my bank vault, and the other 9,000, I will loan that out as soon as I can. That's how I make revenue. So now a woman named Kathy walks into the bank and she's starting a business and she needs money to do so. Now the bank is going to loan her that $9,000. They are going to increase their loans receivable, basic accounting, financial accounting, and they are going to create essentially a decrease in their reserves. They're going to loan out the cash to Kathy, and now they have instead a receivable. They swap one asset for another in accounting terms. Okay, now Kathy can use that for her business. Kathy's trying to start a business. She needs assets. She needs stuff to make her product or her service or her goods with. So she writes a check to a woman named Arlene. Arlene has equipment. Kathy needs it. So Kathy takes the whole $9,000, writes a check to Arlene. Now Kathy's got equipment. Arlene's got cash. Let's not forget that Kathy still owes the bank, Bank 1, $9,000. So she's got $9,000 of equipment and $9,000 of a loan payable to Bank 1. With me so far? It's going to get better. Watch this. All right, now Arlene's got money. She's got Kathy's check, $9,000. She goes to her bank, bank number 2. Bank number 2 says, now I've got reserves and I've got a liability to, Arlene, that should say Arlene, of $9,000. I will change that, okay? Because Arlene can withdraw that money anytime. I'm going to highlight that so I don't forget to change it. Okay, so now Bank 2 has to hold 10% as well. But it can loan the other, well, they've got $9,000, 10% is $900. They've got $8,100 left. They stick $900 in the vault. They can loan the other $8,100 out. Okay, so now this bank is an indirect financial intermediary So none of these people know each other. All right, so Amy, another person, comes along. She borrows the whole $8,100. Bank 2 does the same thing as Bank 1 did, but only with $8,100. Amy starts her business. She buys equipment from Bob. Bob has equipment, sells it to her. Now Bob's got a check. Amy has equipment. Amy has a liability. Okay? Bob runs down to his friendly neighborhood bank, bank number 3, and deposits it. Okay? Hold that thought. We will pick up from here as soon as I can resume, and this is how, again, money is created. I will demonstrate that for you in more detail, and I'll give you a really easy equation to follow to keep track of all this mess that I've just put before you. Okay? Back to you soon. Enjoy your day.